Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari-chan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Youthful or Remnants of Filth by Rou Bao. We're on volume 6 and we're starting at chapter 168. I hope you all enjoy and be sure to stay for the comments at the end. I do have an announcement to make and yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 168. The Head of the Yue Clan. Blood ran along the flashing blade and dripped upon the ground. The sword glare flickered, illuminating two pairs of eyes. Both were long and narrow phoenix eyes, but one was icy sharp, while the other was emotionless and cold. Muzhong scowled. You? Moshi gripped the blade of Yeh-shoe-eh. Despite the defensive barrier in his palm, the power of the holy weapon was too great. Blood oozed from the broken skin of his hand. Muzhong, you should stop. Muzhong scattered the blade into motes of light and leapt back a few strides. His white robes fluttered as Yeh-shoe-eh reformed into dozens of smaller blades. With the wave of his wide sleeves, those sharp daggers shot toward Moshi. Little Lanyi had run out with Moshi. She shrieked, "Shee-eh, be careful!" Moshi opened a massive defensive formation, shielding the others behind it. Raising his other hand, he commanded, sharp, "Shuairen, come!" The snake whip exploded from his palm, coruscating with scarlet light. Catching Shuairen in one hand, he retracted his own barrier the moment the onslaught of blades shot past and lunged toward Muzhong. The snake whip Shuairen, lashing down. As he held Muzhong off, Moshi cried to little Lanyi, "Help them!" Lanyi nodded. Okay. She staggered forward, first throwing herself into Jiang Yexue's arms and bursting into tears, mumbling, Xianxiang. She clumsily untied the immortal binding ropes around his arms. "What are you doing here?" Jiang Yexue murmured. "How did you bring Shizun?" But little Lanyi was too young to explain. She could only weep. Jiang Yexue sighed and didn't press her further. "Don't cry. Go help Chengqing." I'll go right now." Lanyi hiccuped between sobs. She hastily loosened the ropes around Yue Chengqing, who lay on the ground. He was still trembling, though whether out of fury, fear, or bitter disappointment, it was impossible to tell. Little Lanyi helped him to his feet, and Yue Chengqing turned his gaze to Muzhong, locked in battle with Moshi. As he watched, the incredulity faded from his face and tears welled up once more, his features racked with torment. His chapped lips trembled, as if he wanted to call out to Muzhong, but before the first syllables of fourth uncle could spill from his mouth, he dissolved into incoherent sobs. He turned his face away with a whimper, bringing a hand up to wipe his tears away before they could fall. He walked over to Jiang Yexue, eyes rimmed with red. "Gah!" Jiang Yexue was startled. In the past, Yue Chengqing had commonly addressed him with "Hey." Even after their relationship improved, he'd only called him Jiang Da-ge. He'd never called him Ge. Jiang Yexue looked up from his wheelchair at a loss. On the other side of the cave, sparks flew as Moshi and Muzhong fought, spiritual energy clashing fiercely. Shuairen was now the snake whip, now its spiritual snake form, a flickering shadow as it battled Muzhong's Yeh-shoe-eh. Both combatants were cultivators of consummate skill and unmatched martial techniques. Their exchange of blows so quick, their forms were reduced to dazzling blurs. But where Moshi's style was unerringly direct, like a sharp blade stabbing relentlessly at his opponent's ribs, Muzhong moved with a flitting grace, pressing close from every direction at once to cut off his enemy's options. The two of them clashed like meteors. When the long sword collided with the snake whip, the cascade of fiery sword chi rattled the cave's stones and shook dust from the rocks. "Muzhong, you said you'd see him, that you'd acknowledge him, that you'd consider his feelings. Why did you go back on your word?" Moshi asked quietly. Muzhong's only answer was the press of his blade. Red and gold light shone on his handsome face, reflecting in those icy phoenix eyes. He said not a word, as though the battle spoke for itself. "Muzhong, he's still hoping for you to come find him." With a flourish of his wide sleeves, graceful as drifting clouds, Muzhong Chuyi retracted his longsword. He leapt delicately back, then lunged forward with his blade held aloft. The snow-bright glare set his pupils aflame. Jiao-shue, destroy 1,000 mountains. The long sword in his hand scattered again into countless motes of light, which coalesced into a surging wave of spiritual energy at his back. He floated before it like an immortal in his white robes. Raising a hand, he uttered a single, merciless syllable. Go. The snowy wave crested and crashed. Morsi's eyes darkened. Tuan-tien, he bellowed. With the sound of a whale's call, the weapon's massive spiritual form appeared at Morsi's command, its translucent body swaying as it swam toward Muzhong Chuyi's colossal wave. In an instant, the massive whale breached the wave, white rippling outward like reams of silk, its call seeming to echo from beyond time. It opened its gargantuan mouth and swallowed that boundless wall of water whole. As powerful spiritual energy collided, Morsi's black robes and Muzhong Chuyi's white billowed in the wind. The onlookers closed their eyes against the gale. Morsi turned to Jiang Yexue and the others. Run! Little Lanyi began crying again as soon as she heard him. Shee-eh, go! Now! Jiang Yexue coughed up bloody spittle. He said, voice low, If only I could awaken the ghost soldiers within the blood pool. The Yue clan had suppressed the ghosts in Huntian Cave for generations. These vicious spirits had received the Yue clan's offerings and were willing to obey the head of the Yue clan. Yue Juntian had met his end without warning, and he'd been in poor health. He'd had no chance to summon the ghosts from the blood pool. But with his death, the position of the head of the Yue clan passed to its next true-born son, Yue Chunqing, the son of Yue Juntian's first wife. But Yue Chunqing's cultivation was weak, and he'd spent years slacking off in pursuit of fun. He'd never properly studied the methods for controlling the ghost soldiers, and had no hope of deploying them as his ancestors might have. When he heard Jiang Yexue's sigh, Yue Chunqing's heart ached as if pierced with needles. Guilt and sorrow tore through his chest. If he could awaken the ghost soldiers in the blood pool, his Bofu and all the Yue clan's servants wouldn't have died. His fourth uncle wouldn't have been able to kill so many people. If he could have stopped it in time, things wouldn't have turned out like this. The man he had always admired, now completely unrecognizable, fighting in this hellish cave filled with blood. If he had worked a little harder, if he hadn't lazed around and wasted so much time, would it have come to this? Would it have come to this? Little Lanyi was still weeping. No, Shee-eh, I don't want to run away and leave everyone behind again. Morsi gritted his teeth. Do as I say. Hurry and go. But Lanyi was simply too young. After the shocks she'd endured, her volatile constitution was beginning to fray despite the spirit-suppressing technique Morsi had used on her. As she cried, tongues of spiritual flames licked out from her heart. Jiang Yexue furrowed his brow, coughing up more flecks of blood. Little Lanyi. If Lanyi went berserk, she wouldn't be able to differentiate friend from foe. The situation would spin even further out of control. In the worst-case scenario, they'd all die here in this cave full of corpses. As Jiang Yexue sat forward, ready to force his injured body to cast a calming spell on Lanyi's mind, someone stayed his hand with a touch. Chunqing? Jiang Yexue drew in a sharp breath in astonishment. Yue Chunqing's cheeks were stained with tears, but his eyes were no longer blank. He looked at Jiang Yexue and choked out. I'm sorry. It's my fault. I was too lazy, too thoughtless, too stupid. I only wanted to be a spoiled young master. I never worked hard. But this time... Yue Chunqing choked on a sob, but his gaze was resolute. He took hold of Jiang Yexue's hand. This time, leave it to me. I'm the head of the Yue clan now. Chunqing, you... Yue Chunqing didn't respond as he released Jiang Yexue's hand. Using Qinggong, he leapt onto the Ghost Command platform in the middle of the blood pool. When Jiang Yexue and Muzhong Chuyi saw this, both their expressions changed. Calling upon the ghost soldiers of the blood pool was like taking command of an army. The soldiers would only obey someone of sufficient power. Yue Chunqing's abilities were objectively lacking, but if he made up his mind to offer all his cultivation and spiritual energy to take control of them, even detonating his spiritual core, it would be a different matter entirely. Muzhong Chuyi must have recognized his determination. He snorted coldly, and golden light flashed from his sleeves to form a talisman seal. A tide of rustling came from outside the cave. Little Lanar's sharp eyes were first to take notice. "Xianjiang!" she shrieked. "They're coming again!" It was soon clear who she meant. Hundreds of bamboo warriors, wielding unbreakable blades, surged in through the entrance and surrounded Jiang, Yexue, and the others, while a portion threw themselves toward the platform Yue Chunqing stood upon. But Yue Chunqing was the heir to the Yue clan. Standing on the command platform amounted to a summons for the ghost soldiers within the blood pool. Hazy figures burst from the surface, howling as they beat back the bamboo warriors seeking to knock Yue Chunqing into the pool. But the bamboo warriors were mindless. When the first wave sank into the pool, their successors fearlessly forged ahead to replace them with no end in sight. Little Lanar's spiritual energy was spiking out of control. Jiang Yexue tugged her over and cast a new spirit-suppressing spell, but his spiritual energy, especially now, was not as strong as Mo Xi's. His efforts had little effect. "Xianjiang!" Lanar cried. "Bamboo warriors! You can use them too! You can also—" Jiang Yexue shook his head, his expression pained. "Chuyi is the one who taught me the technique. My bamboo warriors are like a pile of broken timber compared to his." Little Lanar wailed in despair. "Why did this happen?" Yue Chunqing's face was bone white as he watched the situation deteriorate. Steeling himself, he summoned a thin blade and cut a bloody line into his palm. He dipped his fingers in the fresh blood and drew a complicated talisman on the spirit sealing stone in the middle of the ghost command platform. He meant to throw caution to the wind and summon the monsters in the pool. "Chunqing!" Jiang Yexue cast about for a way to stop Yue Chunqing, but the blood pool between them had begun to surge and heave. He couldn't get any closer. "In Huntian, there lies a blood pool. Yue Chunqing, stop!" But Yue Chunqing paid him no heed. He sat down and formed the sigil with both hands as he murmured, "In the blood pool, ghost soldiers sleep. Yue Chunqing! Chunqing Gaga!" Yue Chunqing recited the summoning spell without pause. His father had taught him the spell. Even now, Yue Chunqing remembered his words. "In the Yue clan, we are artificer cultivators. We don't need to cultivate methods that consume lots of spiritual energy, save for this one technique, which harms us almost as much as it harms our enemies. As with everything in this world, hard work begets success. Practice this whenever you have some time. As long as you know it well and your foundation is strong, the spell won't do you serious injury." In Yue Chunqing's recollection, he'd been a child, sprawled out carelessly on a bench as he listened, his eyes flickering again and again to Muzhong Chuyi, who stood in a faraway corridor speaking to a servant. "Form the sigil for me," Yue Chunqing had said. "Then recite the spell. In Huntian, there lies a blood pool." Yue Chunqing had parroted him carelessly. "In Huntian, there lies a blood pool." "In the blood pool, ghost soldiers sleep." Yue Chunqing recited that too, his sigil a crooked approximation. "In the blood pool, ghost soldiers sleep. If the ghost soldiers wish to pass. If the ghost—" A gust of wind blew past, shaking the almond blossoms from their branches to fall like rain in the garden. Muzhong Chuyi, who had finished speaking to the servant, turned around. The sound of the wind had caught his attention, and he turned to watch the greenery sway in the garden. He hadn't expected to find Yue Chunqing gazing at him. As he blinked his surprise, Yue Chunqing gave him a brilliant smile. "I'm teaching you to cultivate. Learn to focus." "Ayo! Stop dawdling and recite it with me." Yue Chunqing pouted. "What's the point? Why would I need to summon the monsters in Huntian Cave?" He made a show of raising his voice. "If anything happened to me," he cried, "my fourth uncle would be the first to protect me." Yue Juntian's ire grew. "Who do you think he is? He's an outsider." No way! Fourth uncle is the strongest. Fourth uncle is the best. The child, Yue Chengqing shouted, with no intention of stopping. He's not an outsider. He's my favorite Xiao Juju. No matter what happens, he'll be the first to protect me. He's the strongest. He's the best. He's my favorite Xiao Juju. Yue Chengqing opened his eyes, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. He was bathed in the crimson light of the pool. The marks of the curse from the ghost soldier's spell crawled up the stone of the command platform, creeping up his feet, twinning along his legs, then his waist, spreading across his entire body. Issuing this command with all his strength felt like 10,000 ants were gnawing at his heart, as if 100,000 sharp needles were stabbing into his flesh and hooking barbs into his bones. His father had told him the pain of summoning from the blood pool was the most unbearable pain of all. But that wasn't true. Through his tears, Yue Chengqing looked toward Muzhong Chuyi, still embroiled in his battle with Mo Xi. It was just like the first time he learned this technique, when he'd gazed through the shower of petals at the white-clothed youth in the corridor. Yue Chengqing choked on a mouthful of black blood. He rasped, "If the ghost soldiers wish to pass." The image of Muzhong Chuyi in the rain of almond blossoms became hazier as his own giggling in that bygone courtyard grew more distant in his memory. "Fourth uncle will always protect me. He's not an outsider. He..." An awful pain lanced through his heart. He couldn't keep this up for long. His entire body had begun to burn with translucent flames of scarlet spiritual energy. Yue Chengqing slapped his bloody right palm onto the middle of the spirit sealing stone. The cave darkened, and a chill wind rose. Vivid scarlet burst from the blood pool in a dozen surges as sharp howling tore through the ground and screeched upward. Yue Chengqing cried, "Kill all who block the way!" With this last sharp command, Yue Chengqing fell to his knees on the ghost command platform, heaving up spates of fresh blood. In a daze, he felt a sinister force devouring all the spiritual energy he had accumulated throughout his life. He grew weaker and weaker as his strength inexorably drained away. Ghost soldiers leapt from the blood pool in an endless stream. Just as Yue Chengqing, the new master of the Yue clan, had commanded, they rushed toward Muzhong Chuyi's bamboo warriors like the tide. Blood splashed, blades fell, broken bamboo flew into the sky, and the clash of combat filled the air. These ghost soldiers were vengeful souls hundreds of years old. No matter how strong the bamboo warriors were, they couldn't hold out under the ghost's onslaught. Very quickly, the battlefield turned in favor of Yue Chengqing. Those ghost soldiers howled madly as they tore the bamboo warriors apart, then charged toward Muzhong Chuyi, still fighting Mo Xi. Muzhong Chuyi was an artificer. His combat ability wasn't as strong as Mo Xi's to begin with. He was already at his limit. Attacked from both sides, he lost ground twice as fast. One of the ghost soldiers had wrestled a blade from a bamboo warrior in the chaos. As Muzhong Chuyi blocked a blow from Mo Xi, it stabbed ferociously at his back. There was the dull sound of something tearing. Muzhong Chuyi's amber eyes flickered. With his fair face speckled with blood, he was a terrifying sight. He lowered his head to look at the blade coming out through his chest. He paused, swaying slightly. Then he looked up at Mo Xi again. There was confusion in his gaze. Mo Xi. Mo Xi met his eyes and felt an unexpected shiver up his spine. It was the prick of intuition, an inkling that something wasn't right. Yeah, that's what I said. Coldness crawled up along his back and settled at the base of his neck. "You..." Muzhong Chuyi's countenance shifted. He knitted his sword-like brows and mumbled, I'm not..." Before he could get the words out, the ghost soldier pulled the sword out. Muzhong Chuyi sagged and choked out a mouthful of blood. His spiritual energy flow had been cut off. He plummeted from the air. Like a white butterfly falling into the spider's lair, he crumpled into the dirt. Chapter 169. Oh my God. Oh my God! Oh! Is this the moment? Is this the moment for me? Meat bun? Chapter 169. Jiang Yexue scheme. Is this it? Hold on. Okay. The massive tide from Yexue and Twin Tian's spirit whale clashed one last time before Yexue vanished with its master's defeat. Morsi recalled Twin Tian. One moment, the cave rang with pandemonium. In the next, all was silent. Morsi landed back on the ground and walked over to where Muzhong Chuyi had collapsed, dead or unconscious. If he wasn't dead, he'd been severely injured. His pure white robes were sodden with blood. He lay motionless, like a broken puppet whose soul had been pulled out. The bamboo warriors had lost guidance from their master. They collapsed like grains of sand, tumbling across the ground. The danger seemed to have passed. Little Lanyi was weeping softly as if she'd been granted a second chance at life. Yue Chengqing had given all his spiritual energy and endured grievous injury. He hadn't even the strength to use Qinggong to leap back over the blood pool. Fortunately, Jiang Yexue, too, knew how to command automatons. He summoned one of his own bamboo warriors and instructed it to retrieve the debilitated Yue Chengqing from the platform. Gah! Yue Chengqing looked up with difficulty, coughing a bloody spittle as he mumbled weakly. He slowly turned his eyes toward Muzhong Chuyi. As he looked at his fourth uncle, lying on the ground, his face crumpled. He couldn't speak and had no idea how he should feel. Over the course of a scant few hours, it was as if his flesh and bone had been torn apart, then crushed into mud. In the end, it was little Lanyi who pushed Jiang Yexue's wheelchair forward. The three of them came together in an embrace. It's over. It's over now. Chengqing, you've done very well. Jiang Yexue consoled him in a quiet voice. But no matter what Jiang Yexue said, Yue Chengqing kept trembling, shaking without any sign of stopping. His wounds needed urgent attention, and the disaster that had transpired here between Muzhong Chuyi and the Yue clan needed to be reported to the emperor as soon as possible. After a few more words of consolation, they broke apart and approached Morsi, who'd been staring blankly at Muzhong Chuyi all the while. Shizun, many thanks. If it weren't for you, everyone in the Yue clan might have died in this Huntian cave. Morsi didn't reply to Jiang Yexue. He only shook his head. As Yue Chengqing drew closer, he found himself looking askance at Muzhong Chuyi. He didn't know if the sight of Muzhong Chuyi with his life hanging by a thread brought him more of hatred or of pain. It was as though his spine had been splintered. He doubled over with the ache, sweat streaming down his handsome face. Lanyi, standing nearby, noticed his trembling growing worse and worse. She looked at him, then at Muzhong Chuyi, and quietly tried to comfort him. Chengqing Gaga, if you have questions for him, I have some life-saving medicine here. It's what my papa told me to keep with me, to stay safe. She carefully drew a small pill out of her sleeve. I don't know if it'll help. She had been trying to support Yue Chengqing, but his weight was too much for her slight figure to bear. She couldn't free a hand to give Muzhong Chuyi the medicine. I'll do it, Morsi cut in. He took her medicine and approached Muzhong Chuyi. Turning his back to the others, he gave Muzhong Chuyi the pill. Then he got to his feet. Just as everyone thought he was readying himself to bring Muzhong Chuyi and the others out of Huntian Cave, Morsi suddenly raised a hand. With a hiss of spiritual energy, a barrier came down, sealing the only exit. The other three froze in place. Shihajun? Asked Yue Chengqing. Little Lanyi was also confused. Shihagaga? Jiang Yexue frowned and coughed, regarding Morsi with puzzlement. Morsi offered no explanations. My apologies. I have a few more questions for the three of you. No one knew why he had suddenly turned on them, and they all looked back at him, bewildered. Morsi turned first to Jiang Yexue. Jiangsheng, when I came back to Chonghua, where did we first meet? Jiang Yexue was confused. It was Feiyao Terrace. Why? Morsi didn't answer. His second question was for Yue Chengqing. Chengqing, what does your favorite stall at the Northern Frontier sell? Yue Ting didn't understand either, but he hoarsely replied, meat pies. Morsi looked at Lanar. The little girl stood there blankly, her bright, clear eyes wide as she gazed up at Morsi. Shee-eh? You once gave your Goo Mahng a present. Do you remember what it was? Little Lanar bit her lip. I don't. She hesitated. Do I have to remember? I'll think really hard. It's fine if you can't remember. I'll ask you a different question. Where did we first meet? You can't have forgotten about this completely, right? Lanar couldn't answer. Morsi's eyes darkened. With a flourish of his black sleeves, he grabbed the little girl by the neck. Little Lanar screamed, hiccuping in panic. Morsi raised his other hand, a white pill held between two fingers. It was precisely that life-saving medicine Lanar had given him for Muzhong Chuyi. Did you really think I'd give Muzhong this medicine? He'd become suspicious several moments ago and quickly swapped out the medicine in his sleeve. The pill he'd fed to Muzhong Chuyi was some wound medicine from his own Tiankun pouch. You called this life-saving medicine, but I think we should see if this pill is better for controlling people's minds. He pinched the pill to white powder between his fingers. A slim goo worm wriggled out. Just as expected. Morsi's expression darkened. Speak! He gritted his teeth, grabbing little Lanar by her delicate neck and staring, sharp as a falcon, into her eyes. Who are you really? Lanar burst into tears. I don't understand. Save me! Save me! Xianxiang! Seeing that she refused to confess, Morsi gave up on his verbal interrogation. He gathered spiritual energy in his palm to probe her directly. Though she looked as if her spiritual energy was surging, he could see now that it was but a thin layer of illusion magic. Morsi flinched. Her unmanageable spiritual core had shriveled. She, too, was merely a puppet. Instinct born of years of combat made Morsi yank his hand back, but it was too late. Black tea spread up his fingertips, a telltale sign of poisoning from the Liao Kingdom's rigor mortis herb. You really making things difficult. Lanar slipped out of his grasp and retreated a few steps, a sweet smile unfolding across her youthful features. Moxiong, look at you. Why couldn't you pretend to be dumb? Why did you have to get to the bottom of it? Her tone was obviously no longer that of a child. Morsi had immediately tried to suppress the demonic poison at his fingertips, but his efforts were futile. The poison from the rigor mortis herb were extremely potent and spread quickly. Within moments, numbness crept over most of his body. Breathing slightly ragged, he watched the little girl as she stood quietly beside the blood pool, the shadows of Huentian Cave flickering behind her. I planned to make you a mere witness, but I see you'd rather be a tragic victim. The girl's face was sharp-edged, completely incongruous with her age. Moxiong, she sighed, drifting into silence. Another voice continued from behind Morsi, its tone menacing. You refuse to take the path open to you on earth and insist on charging into dead ends in hell. Straining to endure the poison's agony, Morsi ripped around to look at Jiang Yexue, sitting in his wheelchair. That face was stained with blood, but there was no hint of frailty in his features. I just have to say this really quickly. This man is gonna get up. I just feel it. Jiang Yexue folded his hands before him, gazing at Morsi calmly. He smiled and cocked his head. You learn too much. Don't blame me if you have to die. Oh, I cannot. Okay. Morsi felt a stab of pain that had nothing to do with the poison. He looked at Jiang Yexue's face and couldn't make a sound. His vision blurred. I'm sorry, y'all. I just cannot. Yue Ting's voice took on a hysterical edge. Guh? Jiang Yexue hummed his assent, and Yue Chengqing broke down, shaking and clutching his head, too afraid to believe what he'd heard, let alone think deeper. Impossible! There's no way! How could you— Fool, is there anything on earth that's impossible? Jiang Yexue smiled gently and got to his feet with deadly calm. Oh, God. I knew it! I knew this man could walk! Oh, my God! Oh, sorry, I'm gonna keep flipping out because... Oh, my God. I cannot be chill about this at all. Okay. He rose from his wheelchair and walked toward them, eyes on Yue Chengqing. Yue Chengqing's pupils shrank in his pale face. You were never... Standing tall and slender, with his robes of lotus root cream aflutter, Jiang Yexue was the perfect picture of a refined gentleman, strong as the wind, gentle as jade. In no world would he look like an invalid. That's right. I healed my leg some time ago. I never bothered to tell you. Okay. He raised a hand, and a white gold flame ignited over his palm, the exact color of little Lanar's core. Gathering a killing curse at his fingertips, Jiang Yexue turned away from Yue Chengqing and fixed his gaze on Mo Xi. Apologies, Shizun. I'll have to start with you. With no more warning, he struck. Mo Xi had expended significant amounts of spiritual energy in his fierce battle with Muzhong Chuyi, and now he'd been poisoned by the rigor mortis herb. This poison was capable of paralyzing one's entire body within minutes. By the end, the victim wouldn't be able to so much as twitch. Mo Xi had barely managed to resist its effects. As his spiritual energy countered Jiang Yexue's, he looked up, panting. You removed her spiritual core. Wow. You can tell after a single exchange of blows? Jiang Yexue's smile remained gentle and refined. Indeed, if little Lanar's unruly spiritual core remained in her body, it would only be a hindrance to her. But after I absorbed its spiritual energy via occult methods, I could put it to much better use healing my legs. The golden light in his hand grew brighter and brighter as he spoke, shining oppressively down upon Mo Xi. Why else do you think I'd take her in? I can't stand little kids, especially crybabies. They're really rather irritating. The blinding glow illuminated every line of Jiang Yexue's face with bright light. It was as peerlessly beautiful as pear blossoms in the moonlight, but Mo Xi had never found that face as unfamiliar as he did today. Jiang Yexue, you've gone mad. Some people use the gallbladders of snakes as medicine. I just found a similar method to fix my legs. That's all, said Jiang Yexue. Besides, when I got her from the academy, she was about to have her spiritual core stripped away anyway. Doesn't matter if it was me or the academy that took it from her. Two beams of spiritual energy collided, but one was a trickle, while the other was a raging river. Drawing on little Lanar's core, Jiang Yexue gradually forced Mo Xi back. Don't be so stubborn, Mo Xiong. You've wasted too much energy. You're no match for me as you are. Jiang Yexue wasn't wrong. Sweat beaded on Mo Xi's forehead as the black tea of the rigor mortis herb crawled upward to his arms and wrists. Mo Xi could no longer even crook his fingers to summon Twintian. Suddenly, he heard Yue Chengqing's hoarse shout, full of blackest despair. Ghost soldiers! He intended to use the monsters that hadn't yet returned to the blood pool to stop Jiang Yexue's slaughter. Jiang Yexue's expression darkened. Yue Chengqing had reached the limits of both his physical and spiritual energy. If he continued using this forbidden technique, the effort was likely to kill him before it had any effect. Yet Mo Xi had been subdued by the poison. At the moment, it was Yue Chengqing who posed the greater threat. While Yue Chengqing was still coughing blood, before he could say, obey, Jiang Yexue withdrew his spiritual energy from the battle with Mo Xi and launched himself at Yue Chengqing, sleeves flying behind him. He struck Yue Chengqing to the ground. Jiang Yexue's eyes narrowed with malice. Yue Chengqing, why are you always making trouble for me? Oh my God. Chapter 170. First meeting in white robes on a snowy night. Yue Chenqing's face was stained with blood and filth. He'd cried until his tears had run dry. He stared at Jiang Yexue, and a furious howl tore from his throat. You tricked me! You tricked me! That's because you're stupid, Jiang Yexue said mildly. Oh my God. He'd been all smiles in front of Moxi, but the mirth disappeared when he faced Yue Chenqing. His expression was as cold as crushed ice. Perhaps he presumed Moxi had been sufficiently injured. The poison from the demonic herb could not be removed without outside help, and so took Yue Chenqing to be the more serious threat, reserving for him the greater part of his menace and disgust. He stalked over to Yue Chenqing, staring down at his half-brother. Jiang Yexue was in fact very tall. Straightened to his full height in front of Yue Chenqing, his bearing refined as jade, he animated a bone-chilling air of intimidation. You were foolish and brainless, and you didn't trust your fourth uncle. Who can you blame but yourself? That's not true. I was... Oh, it's not true, Jiang Yexue sneered. You accidentally summoned the ghost soldiers in the blood pool, then accidentally injured your uncle so badly. Is that right? Yue Chenqing's face went ashen. Yue Chenqing, he was much too protective of you. No, it wasn't just him. You were coddled like an idiot by your father, your uncle, and everyone else in the Yue clan. That's how you ended up a useless brat who can't even swear properly. Jiang Yexue grabbed Yue Chenqing by the hair and hauled him up from the ground. He turned and, without a sound, the soulless little puppet Lanyi obediently pushed over the wheelchair. With a grip like iron, Jiang Yexue grasped Yue Chenqing's neck and pushed him into the chair. He may as well have dragged Yue Chenqing toward a hyena's cave with bone strewn across the ground. Yue Chenqing's hair stood on end as he looked at that chair. Face white, he thrashed in Jiang Yexue's grip and was rewarded with a more vicious shove. In a manner that brooked no resistance, Jiang Yexue pinned him down in the wheelchair. Jiang Yexue bent, narrowing his eyes and tilting up Yue Chenqing's chin with slender fingers. Didi, if you grew up in my shoes, you wouldn't have turned into such a naive idiot. You're so stupid, it impresses me. Did you know that? Yue Chenqing was shaking all over. Had Jiang Yexue flayed his flesh from his bones and turned him inside out, he wouldn't feel as mutilated as he did at the moment. The words he wanted to say crowded in his throat. Cries of despair, rage, grief, and hatred. But Jiang Yexue was right. Since childhood, Yue Chenqing had been too sheltered, to the point that he hardly knew a single curse word. The paltry collection he had couldn't express these sentiments at all. He felt he would be crushed by these emotions, like he'd already been crushed by them. In his devastation, all he managed to voice was a useless, stammering query. Why? Why did you do this? Why not? Jiang Yexue stood before the wheelchair he'd sat in for years. There was an inscrutable glint in his eyes now that it was finally someone else's turn. Yue Chenqing, we're both of us sons of the Yue clan. But what was your life like? And what about mine? Yue Chenqing lifted his eyes to meet Jiang Yexue's. Everyone called you a gentleman, he rasped. But all along, your heart was full of filth, dirtier than anyone knew. All this time, Jiang Yexue had been cold. He'd been indifferent or threatening, malicious or cunning. He'd never shown rage. But this accusation from Yue Chenqing was like a key to the rustiest lock in his heart. The flames of fury he'd suppressed for so long flared to life, igniting his pupils and distorting his face. He spat every word, his venom unmistakable. I'm filthy, a false gentleman. Jiang Yexue burst into chilling laughter. Oh, Yue Chenqing. Yue Chenqing. Of all the people in this world, you're the one who has no right to say such a thing to me. Do you know whom you're talking to? Jiang Yexue's laughter shattered and warped as he swept his sleeves back. When he glared down at Yue Chenqing, his eyes were spiderwebbed with hateful red veins. He grabbed Yue Chengqing by the lapels and stared viciously into his face, biting out words laced with rancor. If I hadn't saved you, Yue Chengqing, you'd already be bones in a grave and a soul beneath the springs. Your life came at the cost of that gentleman's death. For too many years had twisted hatred accumulated in his heart with no outlet. When it erupted at last, Jiang Yexue shook from head to toe with loathing. He shoved Yue Chengqing back into the chair so forcefully it rolled backward a few feet. Jiang Yexue rolled up, staring at Yue Chengqing with scarlet eyes. He glanced around the Huntian cave, that symbol of the Yue clan's darkest power. He glanced at the ghost corpses that obeyed only the head of the family. His gaze passed over Mo Xi, paralyzed by the rigor mortis herb, passed over the lost and mindless little Lanyi. At last, it alighted on Muzhong Chuyi, wounded and unconscious on the ground. Jiang Yexue felt his chest had been pierced with a slim needle. The pain was bearable, but it roughened his breathing and reddened his eyes. He turned and leveled a resentful gaze at Yue Chengqing, his eyes narrow with disgust as he repeated those words like a curse. Your life came at the cost of that gentleman's death. Yue Chengqing had no idea what he meant, yet the words were enough to turn his face ashen. What do you mean? What do I mean? Jiang Yexue scoffed. The air was thick with the smell of blood, proof that they were far past the point of no return. Only Jiang Yexue himself knew the truth. If he'd chosen a path more than 20 years ago, none of this slaughter would have been. All of the Yue clan, everything he wanted, would have been his. 23 years ago, two paths had unfolded before him. One day, his mother had summoned him to her room. Despite the passage of years, he remembered his mother, Lady Xie's face, surpassingly beautiful, yet sullen. Yexue, what are we going to do? Heavy ambergris incense burned within the room, making his head swim. Madame Xie sat wreathed in expensive fragrance and wrapped in equally exquisite robes. Her hair glimmered with pearls and jade, and her arms, the cream of lotus roots, were decked in gold and silver bangles. In his memories, his mother always dressed with such flamboyant luxury. Whether it looked good or not was secondary. She adored this kind of extravagance, for it represented Yue Junqian's favor. Young and beautiful teen players were as common as grains of Malay in the entertainment houses of Chonghua. But how many of them could rise through the ranks to reach her coveted place? Madame Xie was proud of her past success, but fretted endlessly over her future circumstances. She knew Yue Junqian was betrothed to Muzhong Huang, and her ambition did not stop at being a humble and lowly concubine. She did all in her power to capture Yue Junqian's heart for herself. Not only did she spend her days currying favor with her husband, she arranged for her son, Jiang Yexue, to be taught by the most virtuous man in the residence, Song Xianxiang. This man instructed Jiang Yexue in both the ways of artificing as well as moral principles to live and act by. As a child, Jiang Yexue didn't often visit his mother. Instead, he went to read books and converse with Song Xianxiang. His old teacher was a kind and righteous man. He taught him to cultivate refinement and modesty, tolerance and elegance. His mother's efforts weren't for naught. Yue Junqian was infatuated with Madame Xie and very pleased with Jiang Yexue. When he'd had a cup too many, he'd say that 100 years in the future, he'd have Jiang Yexue succeed him as the head of the Yue clan and become leader of this renowned artificer family. The mother who heard these words knew they were drunken ramblings, but still she pulled Jiang Yexue closer to kiss him in delight, filled with endless joy. Despite Yue Junqian's lustful appetites, he was a callous and pitiless man at his core. Madame Xie understood his temperament well. Once that momentary satisfaction had passed, she would remind Jiang Yexue in tones of deepest worry. Your father treats us well now, but she's going to move into Yue Manor sooner or later. As soon as she crosses the threshold, we'll be expected to wait on her. It won't be a pleasant life. On that particular day, When Madame Xie called him into her room, she tugged him over and gave him a careful once-over. Without warning, she drew him into a tight embrace. "I only have you now. Only you." "Mom?" The woman swallowed a sob. "Sure. Mu Zhonghong will soon marry into the Yue clan on the 1st of next month." Madame Xie released him, but her hands remained tightly wound into his sleeves, as if clutching a pallet of straw that could keep her afloat. She stared at him through scarlet eyes. Those beautiful eyes were no longer charming, filled as they were with stubbornness and hatred. "Sure, I won't accept this. How could I accept? Mom, we must struggle. We must fight. We must conquer. Do you understand?" But Jiang Yexue had no thoughts of fighting or conquering. In truth, he cared nothing for any of it, neither the riches his mother adored nor the status she coveted. He felt he had enough. Almost too much, in fact. Were it up to him, he'd choose the leisurely life described in his books, residing in a bustling city, yet unbothered by the clamor of carriages. Footnote number 2, the clamor of carriages, is referencing imagery in the 5th verse of 20 Verses of Drinking Wine by Jin Dynasty poet Tao Yuanming. But when he looked into his mother's grieving, obstinate eyes, he couldn't say any of this out loud. He was kind and hated seeing others hurt, and this was his own mother, after all. "Don't worry," she said. "There will be ways. There are always ways. I won't let her take all your things, and I won't let you be bullied either. In Yue manner, you're the only one who shares my heart. Yexue, Shue-er, my dear boy. From here on out, everything I do will be for your sake. You must listen to your mother. Do you understand? Everything will return to us." What is she gonna do? Break his legs? It just feels, I don't know, I feel something weird coming up. He blinked. He was a precocious child. Although he didn't blindly agree with his mother's thirst for power and wealth, he understood her low-born origins and knew her path hadn't been an easy one. He was only too aware of her terror that all her current splendor might come crashing down around her. In his heart, he understood her. It was just that he didn't care to fight. On the day Mu Zhonghong married into the Yue manor, his mother dressed herself beautifully in her finest clothes. She had once been a teen player and was accustomed to flattering and dancing attendants. Presenting an exquisite, smiling face posed no challenge to her. She welcomed Mu Zhonghong politely, yielded to her humbly, and fawned over her with all the required submissiveness. Jiang Yexue couldn't bear to see his mother like that. When the feast started and the guests filled their seats, he slipped away from the bustling party. It was past dark, and snow had fallen with the night. He wrapped his fur coat more tightly around himself. The plum blossoms in the garden were in full bloom, so he thought to pick a few branches to place in his mother's and his teacher's rooms. He strolled along the path, steps crunching as he walked over snow. There among the trees, he spied a youth in a scarlet cape over white robes standing in the falling snow, looking up at the old plum blossom tree beside the whitewashed wall with its dark roof tiles. That was the first time he saw Muzhong Chuyi. Chapter 171. Youthful Days of Tenderness and Budding Yearning? Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Both he and Muzhong Chuyi were young back then, boyish and immature. He had no idea this child who looked even younger than him was in fact his uncle in terms of family hierarchy. He took him for a young master from one of the visiting families who'd snuck into the courtyard to see the flowers. Y'all, I can already see where this is going. Oh man, the boy looked to be in a foul mood. He was staring intently at the plum blossoms and hadn't noticed someone approaching him from behind. It wasn't until an umbrella, its canopy of blue-green oil paper painted with scenes of cranes amid clouds, came over his head to block the snow and obscure his view of the flowers, that he started and turned around. Jiang Yexue gave him a small smile. Which family do you belong to?" he asked, in the tone of an older boy coaxing a younger one. "What brings you out here without an umbrella in such heavy snow?" Muzhong Chuyi widened his eyes. He took one step back, then two, the expression on his face turning from surprised to haughty. He answered Jiang Yexue's question with one of his own. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" He asked it in a crude and coarse manner, without any courtesy, as if he didn't want to waste breath on Jiang Yexue. But Jiang Yexue had a mild temper. A gentleman, after all, was like jade, constantly polished and refined. Despite his youth, he was big-hearted and always looking after others, so he only smiled. "My surname is Yue. I'm Yeh-shoe-eh. As for why I'm here, it's because this is my home. The plum blossom tree you're looking at is my favorite one." For some reason, the other boy narrowed his eyes. "Oh, you're Yeh-shoe-eh, Xie Yilan's child?" This youngster called his mother brazenly by name, and he'd even gotten it wrong. Jiang Yexue, despite all his self-restraint, felt a measure of exasperation and offense at this, but he didn't show it. Instead, he reached out and pulled that youth further beneath his wide oil paper umbrella. "Listen up. My mother's name is Lanyi, not Xie Yilan," Jiang Yexue chided gently. "Also, the snow fall's getting heavier. If you keep standing here like a fool, you'll catch cold. Come, I'll take you back to the reception pavilion to find your parents." The boy slapped his hand away rudely. How uncivilized. Do you know who you're talking to?" Jiang Yexue laughed in spite of himself. Kid? Muzhong Chuyi let the hood of his cape fall back, tucked an errant lock behind his ear, and leveled him with a stern gaze. His thin lips parted around his next words. "Yexue, I am your uncle." Jiang Yexue's eyes widened. After a beat, he burst into laughter and reached out to feel the youth's forehead. "Oh, you," he chuckled. "Did you get a fever from the cold?" He didn't remember how this farce had ended. Many minor details had slipped his mind. All he remembered was that later, Muzhong Chuyi left with an unhappy sweep of his sleeves. And after the wedding feast, when he followed his mother to the tea ceremony greeting of the mistress of the house, he saw the youth from under the plum blossom tree standing at Muzhong Huang's side and looking at him indifferently. Only then did he realize at last that this white-robed youth who looked about his age really was his young uncle. The boy's name was Muzhong Chuyi. Though they now lived in the same residence, Muzhong Chuyi kept to himself. It was rare for him to show his face even 3 days out of 10. At the beginning, Jiang Yexue tried to make conversation with him, but upon receiving the cold shoulder time and time again, he gave up. Song Xianxiang had taught him that the friendships of gentlemen flowed naturally, as water in a stream. Jiang Yexue held himself to a certain standard of refinement. He wouldn't force it if Muzhong Chuyi wanted to keep his distance. But not everyone was as good-natured and kind as his Song Shifu. After Muzhong Huang married Yue Juntian, Jiang Yexue could acutely feel the attitudes toward him changing, both in and outside the manor. Those who had used to flock to him were the first to disappear, and as time passed, the smiles of some elders were no longer as warm as they had been. Jiang Yexue was kind, but he wasn't stupid. He saw all this with clear eyes and understood why it was so. But he was gentle in his dealings. He preferred not to bicker over favor gained or lost, and so he didn't think much of it. But Madame Xie's resentment grew to consume her, causing Jiang Yexue no end of worry and frustration. Every day she would harp on the precious trinkets Yue Juntian had gifted Muzhong Huang and how much they were worth, or what outfits Muzhong Huang had purchased that day and in which styles. As time passed, her words grew more and more cutting, until her comments did not bear repeating. Jiang Yexue would frown slightly as he listened, but as she was his mother, the most he could do was sigh to himself. It wasn't as though he didn't console her, but the moment he tried to persuade her otherwise, she'd glare and curse him out, exclaiming that he had no ambition and didn't understand suffering. As time passed, Jiang Yexue learned to hold his tongue. Madame Xie's jealous obsession with Muzhong Huang grew deeper by the day, and by the time Mu Zhonghang fell pregnant, her once lovely features had become twisted with hatred. Mu Zhonghang was of royal blood and the first wife. The whole manor was ready to fetch her the moon and the stars to keep her happy. Not even while pregnant with Jiang Yexue had Madame Xie enjoyed such pampering. The servants could read the writing on the wall, and the difference in their treatment of the two mistresses grew more and more pronounced. Even the attendants Jiang Yexue had favored began to treat him with disdain. Madame Xie's hatred festered. "Look," she said to Jiang Yexue, "you speak convincing others with kindness, of living well by adapting to our circumstances. But whom have you convinced? How well are you living?" Jiang Yexue was hurt, but he persisted in believing that his conduct was correct. Riches and wealth were easily had. A clear conscience was a far rarer thing. But even his father gradually began to distance himself from him in consideration of Lady Muzhong's feelings. Other than Song Xianxiang, no one else in the entire residence was willing to associate with him. How could his heart not ache? Late in the spring of that year, Song Xianxiang took to his bed with illness and couldn't teach him artificing techniques. Jiang Yexue had always revered his teacher and couldn't bear to disturb him in his convalescence. He attempted to puzzle through some work on his own. He took his mechanisms to the other artificer advisors in residence, only to be turned away under a variety of pretenses. Sorry, Yexue Gongzi. I still have plenty of work to do today. My apologies, Yue Gongzi. This old man is indisposed. I'll swap tips with you once I feel better. How does that sound? This lowly one still has much to learn myself. I'm afraid I cannot teach the Gongzi. Not a single person he asked was willing to help him. Cradling his wooden mechanisms in his arms, Jiang Yexue wandered through empty corridors in a daze, his head hanging low. Suddenly, he heard someone call his name behind him. Yeh-shoe. He turned, all his disappointment and heartache written clear across his face. Much to his surprise, the eyes he met were Mu Zhongchuyi's. Mu Zhongchuyi furrowed his brow. What kind of expression is that? His uncle walked over with white robes aflutter and peered down at the mechanisms in Jiang Yexue's arms. Your work? Mu Zhongchuyi plucked a little water clock from the top of the pile and looked it over. Eastern blood crystals for the sand, ebony sandalwood for the body. Your own design? Jiang Yexue had heard of Mu Zhongchuyi's skill and spoke with some embarrassment. Yes. But Mu Zhongchuyi didn't laugh at him. He put the little water clock back on the pile. Come to my workshop. I'll teach you. Jiang Yexue had never dreamed that Mu Zhongchuyi would volunteer. His eyes went wide, and he remained rooted to the spot in astonishment. Mu Zhongchuyi had turned on his heel the moment he finished speaking. He walked some distance before noticing Jiang Yexue hadn't moved. He turned his head, nonchalant. Hurry up. All right. The days that followed, before Yue Chengqing's birth, were the richest and happiest days of Jiang Yexue's life. Although Mu Zhongchuyi wasn't much older than him, he had a masterful grasp of artificing and taught Jiang Yexue many techniques and secret methods he'd never before fathomed. Mu Zhongchuyi did whatever he liked and cared nothing for public opinion, so Jiang Yexue's popularity and status, or lack thereof, were meaningless to him. Jiang Yexue, on the other hand, was deeply gratified to find a kindred spirit, as when Ziqi met Bo Ya. Footnote number 3. Bo Ya and Zhong Ziqi, two scholars from the Warring States period, exemplify a friendship of deep understanding. Bo Ya was a teen player, while Zhong Ziqi loved listening to music. No matter what his mother said, he went to Mu Zhongchuyi's artificing workshop every day to talk to him. Madame Xie grew only harsher with him, and her disappointment mounted by the day. She called him unfilial, a selfish social climber. She surmised that Mu Zhonghuang must have sent Mu Zhongchuyi to drive her son and her apart, cursing her out as an awful bitch. At one point, she grew thunderously angry after Jiang Yexue objected to her disparaging Mu Zhongchuyi and stopped responding to her son at all. She wouldn't hear any of his explanations and even refused to let him return to her pavilion to sleep. Jiang Yexue didn't wish to fight with his mother, nor make a scene and give others an excuse to mock her. Left with few options, he awkwardly approached Muzhong Chuyi to ask if he could live in his courtyard for a time. Muzhong Chuyi glanced around at the items in his courtyard. On the artificing bench was a set of tools, compasses, and rulers that belonged to Jiang Yexue. There was a second stool that Jiang Yexue customarily occupied, and some trinkets on the table that Muzhong Chuyi had no interest in, but Jiang Yexue used often. He replied coolly, "Isn't it a bit late to ask permission now?" Jiang Yexue fidgeted in silence. The two youths also shared times of idleness. Muzhong Chuyi's fixation on artificing wasn't as single-minded as everyone thought. For example, he'd buy from street-side stalls the palm-sized bamboo warriors that children begged for, then sprawl on the bamboo couch and call Jiang Yexue over for a match. As they fought, he'd come up with the idea for some kind of new magical implement, then stay up the whole night drawing diagrams. Often, he'd fall asleep on his stomach on the floor, compass and ruler still in hand. When he woke, he'd go right back to drawing. Whenever Muzhong Chuyi fell asleep like this, Jiang Yexue couldn't resist sneaking a few glances at him. How could this person be his uncle? He was so young and immature. When he drifted off holding his brush, he'd often wake with ink on his face. How silly. On one occasion, Muzhong Chuyi woke blearily in the middle of the night after some dream, blinking sleep from his eyes. He discovered Jiang Yexue gazing at him and asked with impatience, "What are you looking at me for?" Even Jiang Yexue was taken aback by how warm his own voice sounded when he murmured with a smile, "I think Xiaoju looks very formidable." Perhaps Muzhong Chuyi didn't realize he was joking, or perhaps he didn't hear him at all. He let out a soft snort, long lashes fluttering, and fell back asleep. It was in that moment, as Jiang Yexue looked at Muzhong Chuyi, that a vague, terrifying impulse surged to life within him. Oh God. The thought made him shiver with fear, to the point he almost fled. At the time, he hadn't dared think about it too deeply. If he had, he'd have wondered how such heinous thoughts could occur to him. Though they weren't related by blood, Muzhong Chuyi was just an abandoned child Muzhong Huang had taken in. The reality of their rank and status was right in front of him. A true gentleman, after all, would never have such designs on Muzhong Chuyi. Several more months of formless uncertainty passed in the same way, and then Muzhong Huang's child was born. The instant the babe's first wail echoed through the halls, two people in that illustrious family fell into hell. The first was Jiang Yexue's mother, Madame Shee-eh. Yue Manor had welcomed its true heir, an infant son born of the first wife. Yue Juntian gave him the name Chunqing, bright morning. Chunqing. Chunqing. Muzhong Huang's son was light and radiance, the dawn sun rising in a clear and boundless sky. But what of Lanyi's child, Yexue, evening snow? Despite having once blanketed the land in purest white, daybreak reduced it to nothing. Of course her heart broke. Of course she felt hate. The second person was Muzhong Chuyi. Muzhong Huang had died in childbirth. In one stroke, he'd lost the elder sister and mother who'd taken him in and given him a second chance at life. His benefactor was gone. All right, you guys, so we are going to stop there. I could read another chapter, but I'm trying to really space this out well because the chapters are so short, and I read a lot yesterday, which means there's even shorter amount to read, from what I normally do. So I'm wanting us to have a live reading session where we read the last 3 or 4 chapters this coming Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I can't read too much during the week. So I figured I'd just release like 3 or 4 chapters each day, maybe like 30 or so pages, whatever. But anyway, it's so crazy because there's plenty for me to comment on, of course. But I think we all know what I'm going to comment on. And it's so sucky because I can't really comment that much further because we've gone back in time. But I was right. I was right. There was something wrong with Jiang Yexue. I knew it. It said he was so kind to the point of absurdity. I knew it was truly absurd. And now I just see, like, in our last recap session, I was just starting to doubt myself a little bit, but I was like, no, I'm gonna hold fast though. And I'm glad I did, because I would have hated if no, it wasn't my last live. I think it was like the last reading where I said, I feel like maybe Meat Bun is trying to make me feel like there's something wrong with Jiang Yexue, but it's actually someone else. But I held fast to my belief that he was the problem. Anyway, boy, these chapters were just kind of like, whoa to me. And I figured as well that like something was wrong with Muzhong Chuyi getting his revenge. Like, I was like, he's not him. That's all I knew, but I didn't know what. But now knowing that there was even like a pill to be fed to control people, then it's obvious that must have been given to him in some kind of way and he did not know. And so he slaughtered his family and was about to slaughter the remaining 2 people. But boy, I was concerned there for a second, because I'm like, there's no way. Like, there was just, I know that he's a cold person. And remember volumes ago, I think it was in volume 3, you know, after he was scolding Yue Chengqing for, you know, going out to the Bat Island, I was like, what if Muzhong Chuyi is being harsh to Yue Chengqing, but he actually really deeply cares for him? And now it seems like that is the case. Oh my gosh. I love it when I get things right. Even if I don't get everything right, I love when I'm in the right direction or get some stuff right. So honestly, I don't even have a lot to say. I really don't. I didn't take notes while I was reading. I was just trying to get the reading done. And then, you know, because the discussion is going to be so close. I just won't say anything else. The point is, I was right. Tengo razón. Anyway, so yeah, I'm not going to say much else. The only other thing that I am going to say, which I already said, but yes, this Saturday, October 11th, I want to do a live reading of our final chapters together. At least the last 3 or 4, we'll see. But that's going to be at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the same times, basically. And then I'm thinking that Sunday, the very next day, October the 12th, the same times, we'll go ahead and do a recap, because there's no reason for me to like take up 2 weeks to read 311 pages. Or actually, it was really just 300, because it started on page 11 and ends on page 311. So yeah, I was just like, we're going to end this book before the 2 weeks, which means we're actually ahead of schedule. So who knows? We might actually start Tianjingju a little early. Or I don't know. Or I'll figure out what we'll do in that time. But anyway, I'm excited. I hope you all are excited. And I'm ready to figure out more information on Jiang Yexue and his villain arc, or why he is the way he is. But obviously, it's clear that he definitely developed a crush on Muzhong Chuyi. So, and then like the next chapter name, which I'm not reading, but I'm going to tell you the chapter name because haha, it's called An Accident of Love Brings an End to Fate. So first off, we already know he had a thought of kissing him. He's definitely going to kiss him. He's going to kiss him in that next chapter. I'm just ready to see it. Anyway, I hope you all have a beautiful day. I love you all. Te amo. Je t'aime or j'adore. I don't remember. Saranghe. Well, 아니면. And I have no idea why I've started trying to say I love you in multiple languages other than Mandarin, because this... Goodbye, you guys.